All right. Good afternoon or good morning, I guess. Usually we do this in the afternoon, but it's morning this time for our finance officer update in January of 2022. That's hard to believe. I mean, COVID, um, with COVID, it seems like time has really flown. And just 2 years ago, we were in offices, and a lot of us are back in offices and out of offices and in and out of offices and going to and fro. But here we are doing a Teams call. This time it's a webinar, so it's a little bit different. But glad to have you join us today. We have some important things to share with you about new budgets and legislative updates. And we also have things on ESSER, accumulating data that's going to have to be shared with the federal government and those kind of things. So a lot of good things and good speakers to share that with you. But let me give you a little heads up on um, the appearance of what you have before you today. Because with the Windows webinar, it looks a little bit different than what we have done in the past with the live event. So if you'll notice at the top of your screen, you'll have a little thing that shows a um, a chat feature. And let me see. Yeah, you can raise a hand and ask questions and those kind of things. But another thing we're going to do throughout today is allow attendance to be taken, hopefully quasi silently. Whereas in the past, I've done like colors, like, red, white, and blue and green or something like that. But that was kind of disruptive to the conversation as we were going along. But those who are CPAs are used to what we're going to try to do today. So it's a first attempt. So bear with us. If it doesn't work, we'll try it again in the future. But there's going to be pop-up poll questions throughout this hour, and all it's going to say is, "Are you paying attention?" So, and it's going to say there's going to be two answers, yes or no. And so it doesn't really matter which one you answer, but because if you if you answer, you're paying attention. So, but just answer one of the questions, and it'll automatically record it for us. And as long as you answer the questions, then you'll get credit, a 1 hour credit for today, 1 hour CPE for today's attendance. So hopefully that's what we intend for to happen. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on how that is going to work. So um, I'll just pass it on now to Rob McKinney, who's going to get it started for us as far as the conversation goes.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I know this is an extremely busy time for our finance officers with all the beginning of the calendar year, end of the calendar year activities. So we have tried to pack a lot in 1 hour. We know your time is very valuable, so we're going to try to get through our agenda very quickly, but we do have some information that we'd like to share with you today and look forward to talking to you. I want to first introduce to you Brian Perry. Brian is our new legislative liaison here at the Kentucky Department of Education. He reminded me this morning that he is on day 3, just day 3. So we're going to be especially kind to him in as far as the presentation and our questions that we have for him. He really has hit the ground running, though. He's been able to participate in some meetings with us between the Christmas and New Year's time. While he was really kind of juggling 2 jobs, he comes to us from KCTCS, where he was a legislative liaison in that world, and now has come to the pre-K through 12 environment. So we want to welcome him. I'm sure you will start seeing him either on finance officer updates and also superintendent's webcast if you get a chance to join those. So Brian's going to kick us off. If we can go to the next slide, please. Quick overview of the agenda. We're going to do a legislative and budget update, and Brian and I are going to tag team on that. We're going to look at maintenance of equity. We're going to do ESSER integrated data collection and give you an update on that. A little bit better news than what we probably shared the last time. And we're also quickly going to go over temporary remote instruction, since we've had a lot of questions about that as the new year has started and some provisions in the legislative body have changed those right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and if you can advance to the next slide, and he's going to catch us up on a little bit of things that are going on in the General Assembly. Brian?
Good morning. It's good to be here. It's been a crazy few weeks as I transitioned over from KCTCS. I was there for about 8.5 years and was at EKU for about 5.5 before that. So it's a pretty big switch to come over to this side of the aisle, but it's been great so far. So we'll give you a quick update. As you may know, they had to do redistricting because of the census this year. And so that pushed back the filing deadline for the fall elections until the 26th. So traditionally not a lot happens till after the filing deadline. So not a lot of movement happening yet with bills, but look for that to pick up after the 26th. And just remember that if you're interested in such things, the entire House is up for re-election in the fall, as well as half the Senate. With that, we do have, you can go to the next slide if you don't mind. So there are a couple of bills that you may be of interest that are already law. So they passed both chambers and were acted on by the governor. So these have already been enacted. So House Bill 5 was the West Kentucky Safe Fund. This does quite a few different things, but the big thing that I think that you all will be interested in is it provides $30 million that flows through KDE to local school districts for a number of disaster relief efforts. Senate Bill 25 was a little broader in terms of not being just tornado relief, but also kind of a COVID disaster relief bill. The big thing that it did for you all is provided 10 additional remote instruction days. These are different and separate from your NTI days. So you'll have 10 additional ones, and I think you all had 10 of these in the fall. So this is kind of a continuation of what they did for you in the fall. So those are the two bills that have, oh, one says the sound is low. I don't know if that's on my end. Let's see.
We can hear you just fine.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's just somebody, one person. All right. So those are the two bills that have been enacted. Those are really high-level overviews, obviously, of what they do. But I think that, and again, feel free to shoot me some tips on what you all want to know about from the legislative side. As we go forward, we'll kind of start to zero in on what you're most interested in, because I'm happy to talk about any or all of the bills as they relate to what you all do. So are there any questions about the two enacted bills? So again, these are already law. Both of these had emergency clauses, so they wouldn't affect immediately. Okay, so next we'll go to the next slide. So we'll just run through some of the bills that we're watching in both chambers. So in the House, so things got off to a very bizarre start this session. Traditionally, the way that the budget session works is that the governor presents their budget at what's called the budget address. They do a big kind of pomp and circumstance kind of thing, and both chambers are there, and everybody watches the governor put out their proposal. The next day that gets filed in the House is what's called the budget bill, and then the House then passes their version. That's not what happened this go around. The House preempted the governor and filed their budget proposal about a week ahead of time. So it's really a kind of a bizarre situation, but the House budget bill is House Bill 1. This is, in all honesty, the bill to watch in terms of the budget. The governor's bill did get filed. It unfortunately doesn't really matter because this is the bill that's going to move forward. I think this is getting heard in A&R this afternoon. So that'll be the first real movement on it. So I would imagine that in the next few weeks, we'll get it out of their chamber and over to the Senate. At that point, the Senate will probably sit on it for a while. The Senate usually complains loudly that they don't get much time with the budget because the House always waits until the very last bit of the session to send it over. So I suspect that the Senate will sit on the budget for a while and take their time to pass their version. Once that happens, they'll go into conference committee and hammer out the final version that gets sent to the governor for action. In reality, whatever they send to the governor will be the final budget because they have supermajorities in both chamber, and although the governor has line item veto power with the budget bill, they can overturn any of those vetoes pretty easily. So whatever they send over to the governor for action will almost certainly be the final bill or the final budget for the next 2 years. So House Bill 33 got voted out of committee yesterday unanimously. This is a school facilities bill. Among other things, it deletes the reporting requirement for efficient design. I think in committee yesterday, they were saying that this takes somewhere between 100 and 200 hours a year. So that's a huge burden that hopefully will be lifted. I think they said this was the 3rd year for this bill. That's not unusual, right? It takes time for these things to happen, especially when they're pretty big topics. So the fact that it's gotten out of the House a few times may put some pressure on the Senate to move on it this year. So we'll be watching it closely once it gets out of the House. And KDE supports that bill. House Bill 63, this would require a school resource officer to be in every single school by August 1st of this fall. This is not a bill that we are in support of. It's a really simple bill in that it makes a very small change in the statute that will have a very big fiscal impact because there's no funding attached to this. And so that's our real hang up from our side of things, as well as the fact that there's a critical shortage of folks that could fill these roles at present. So we'll be watching that one as it potentially moves on. So House Bill 44, this was a mental health in district attendance policy bill that passed out of the House 94-0 this week. So again, I'm not real sure where this one is in the Senate yet. The last couple of years, we've seen the House send over a lot more bills than get sent from the Senate to the House. So it's kind of difficult sometimes to gauge exactly what's going to move in the Senate. So House Bill 126 is a fast food. Oh, sorry, all sorts of things are popping up. So House Bill 126 is Chair Huff's. She's chair of the Education Committee in the House. For a couple of years now, she's been pushing an idea that would make FAFSA completion a high school graduation requirement. She's gotten this out of the House in the past, although the last couple of years it didn't really make much movement, mostly due to the fact that COVID really upended everything. This bill is supported by the Kentucky Chamber. They've really been pushing it. When it first got out, kind of came out a couple of years ago, it seemed like one of the big concerns was that this would be the only non-academic requirement for high school graduation. But I haven't heard much of that lately, so we'll see where it goes. It obviously got out of her committee. It got assigned to education, so she got out of her committee pretty fast. So it's awaiting a vote on the House floor, and we'll see if it gets called. It's stalled out at this point a couple of times now. House Bill 194, this is one that we've had a few different conversations about with the sponsor, as well as the principal that we kind of think is helping push the idea. This would make an alternative pathway for students, for state agency students to get a alternative diploma. And we have some concerns with this bill. We've talked about them with the sponsor, but we don't think that it's going to get amended in the House. It's awaiting a vote on the floor right now. If it gets out of the House, we'll revisit on the Senate side and see if we can get some of our concerns addressed. Our biggest concern with this one is that it doesn't really specify what on track to graduate means. And so we have concerns that students that are only a few credits short of a traditional diploma might get put over into this alternative pathway. But we also recognize that if someone's 17 and has 3 credits, then this might be a more viable option. So those are the House bills, the kind of high-level version of the House bills that we're watching. Are there any questions about these guys? All right, we'll roll over to the Senate. And so you'll notice that there's not nearly as many bills in the Senate. So there are 100 House members and only 38 Senate members. So there's always a lot fewer bills in the House than there are in the Senate. So Senate Bill 1, and again, sorry if I'm telling you all things that are very obvious and that you already know, but the lower the bill number, traditionally the higher the priority it is for that chamber. So Senate Bill 1, House Bill 1 are usually reserved for the top priorities of each chamber, each session. So the fact that this is Senate Bill 1 kind of tells you exactly how important this is for the Senate this year. This would move principal selection and curriculum decisions from the site-based decision-making councils to the superintendents. It passed out of the House passed out of the Senate after quite a bit of vote, or after quite a bit of debate, 25-9, pretty much on party lines. So it's over in the House. You'll notice that it passed out that first week that they were in session. But, whoa, my screen just went blank. Hi, Robin.
Hey, I think what has happened is I bet Josh got kicked off when he got a call. If you hold on just a second, I will pull up the presentation for you. So sure. You keep talking about Senate Bill 1 and I'll get it going.
Yeah. So Senate Bill 1 is over in the House, but don't expect the House to move on this anytime soon. Because it's Senate Bill 1 and is such a high priority for the Senate, I think that the House is very likely to sit on this until the very end. This is kind of their ultimate bargaining chip right now. And so they're going to hold this one close to the vest for a while. The Senate the last few years has gotten a little perturbed at the House. It's sending so many bills over. So I think that they're going to sit on this one and try to use this as a leverage to get some of the things that they've been wanting to get done finally across the finish line. All right, so moving right along. Senate Bill 9, this is another repeat bill that had quite a few changes, as I understand it, from the last go round. So we are in favor of this bill. We have talked on it. And actually, after I sent this presentation in yesterday, we got notice that House Bill 226, which is the companion bill in the House for this. So it's a companion bill just means that it's the identical version that's in the other chamber. So House Bill 226 will be heard at noon in House A&R. We'll also be presenting on that one with the sponsor, Representative Tipton. So anyway, the big change here is that they've made enough changes that Read to Achieve will not be impacted by the implementation of Read to Succeed. And that was apparently the big hang up last year or in the past couple of years as they've worked on this bill. In debate in the Senate, it was pretty clear that most of the folks are on board with the changes and feel comfortable that the changes they've made will ensure that Read to Achieve is not impacted by this bill. And so that's a good thing. So we'll see how today goes in the House and if other members there have the same concerns. And I just put that Senate Bill 57 is the companion to House Bill 33 on here as well. Are there any questions on the Senate bills or anything else happening in the Senate? I just had just a couple of more thoughts that you might be interested in. There are 2 school choice bills that were filed. Senator Alvarado is kind of leading this charge this go round. He's a pretty important person in the Senate. So it's got a pretty powerful sponsor in the Senate, a little less so on the House side, but it's House Bill 305 and Senate Bill 50. We'll be watching those. Again, I don't expect much will happen until after the 26th, but we will certainly keep you appraised on that. And then House Bill 563 from last session, which was a school choice bill, we are still sort of monitoring the implementation of parts of that, as I think that comes up this fall. So that is a very quick update on stuff that I've learned a lot about in the last 2 weeks. So if you have any questions or want me to expand on anything, please let me know. Or if you have questions on anything else you've heard talk about as it relates to Frankfurt.
As you all can tell, Brian's a very quick study. He's got the lingo going on our K-12 education, and we are very, very fortunate that he kind of knows the ropes of the General Assembly and is really diving into learning kind of substance of what we do. So thank you, Brian. If no one has any questions, we're going to go right into discussions, really a little deeper dive on the budget. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So Brian kind of introduced to us that it's, we use words all the time when it comes to the General Assembly about unusual or different or unique. And we do have 2 budget bills currently filed for consideration. And Brian talked about those. House Bill 1, which we've kind of dubbed the House budget, and House Bill 285, which is the governor's recommended budget. and filed about a week apart, and the House did kind of preempt the governor by getting out in front. So it is kind of a different approach, and has caused additional work, I think, for the staff over at LRC. But the House, as they introduced their budget, they did explain that as they filed it, that they did meet with agencies during the interim and learned a lot from state agencies on the needs and wants. And then of course, the governor, of course, is interacting with state executive branch agencies very frequently. I would say both contain good provisions for K-12 public education and historic levels of funding. It's been such a long time since we've really had any money to work with. And so here we are at a very different place than we usually are. Usually we're concerned about budget cuts or reductions or things along that line, things that we would lose. And both House Bill 1 and House Bill 285 contain additional funding for K-12 public education. So in that sense, we are in a good spot. And so now people are trying to compare which is better, and so we're going to spend a little bit of our time today talking about the differences between the two bills. Let me say that many of the additional budget requests, if you were following along with the State Board of Education's actions in the fall before we submitted our recommended budget here at the Department of Education, many of our additional budget requests that were recommended were either fully or partially funded. So again, very appreciative to both House Bill 1 and House Bill 285 for making public education for K-12 a very high priority. Next slide, please. I am going to focus today, again, we're at high level. This is day, I think, 11 of the General Assembly. And for those of you who have been around for a little bit, like myself, we know that things will change. So consider this as a point in time information. It will undoubtedly change, but we're going to just point out some of the key differences that we see in certain areas. Also, if I can share with you, don't panic if you don't see funding for something that's not mentioned in here. For many of the things that were already in the last budget, language and money, it has rolled forward. So just because you don't see something in the presentation today, don't panic. It's probably there. It's just we're not highlighting in today's presentation. Additionally, I'm not going to get into any information on the retirement systems or funds that may be going to the Cabinet for Health and Family Services to support our local school districts. Again, these are just the highlights, and there will be opportunity for change. In fact, I think in today's House A&R at noon, House Bill 1 is being discussed at noon. So as soon as I tell you this information here at 11:20, it's going to change possibly at noon. So this is for informational purposes, and I'll just try to hit some of the highlights. So House Bill 1, some of the key differences between the two bills. House Bill 1 has a base per pupil guarantee at $4,100 in fiscal year 23 and $42 in fiscal year 24. While the governor's recommended budget, House Bill 285, has a base per pupil guarantee of $4,300 and $4,500. Both of these amounts for the base per pupil include amounts for full day kindergarten funding. So if you look in the budget bill, you'll see language about full day kindergarten funding, but you won't see a separate amount. So you won't see $140 million or something like that. It is included in the base per pupil guarantee in both bills. You will see additional transportation funding. This is additional on top of the money that we had already received before, that $214 million. Additional transportation funding of $174.9 million in House Bill 285, compared to an additional $59.6 million in House Bill 1. In House Bill 1, it's also probably worth noting that there's some language about how that money will be distributed. The original $214 million base would be distributed proportionately based upon each district's transportation costs, but the remaining $59.6 million would be distributed evenly among districts, but no district shall receive funds in excess of its transportation costs. So additional funding in both of those budget bills, but a little different in how it would be distributed based upon which bill or if the language even stays in. Also, in House Bill 1, the difference is that there is a mandated salary supplement for audiologists and speech pathologists of $2,000, very similar to what we see with our National Board Certified Teachers, that mandated salary supplement. So they've put in a different category for that. And I just put on there nickels, nickels, nickels. We really aren't going to dive into nickels, but there's some different amounts of funding in the nickels. Probably not worth spending a lot of time at this juncture because, again, things will likely change. Next slide, please. Also, key differences, if in House Bill 285, which is the governor's recommended budget, in each year, there is money, probably the biggest funding difference. The governor's budget includes money for universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds. This is additional funds on top of the funds that we already receive for preschool. So you see that we are, the governor's recommended budget would provide another big chunk and to help us get to universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds. The governor's recommendation also includes $11 million for textbooks and instructional resources. If you'll remember, textbooks was actually, the funding was actually reduced to zero several budgets ago. And so in this one, $11 million would be restored for textbooks and instructional resources. There's a couple of new things, $6.2 million for social emotional learning and mental health supports that would, an ABR that was recommended by the Kentucky Board of Education that would be operated through the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support here. Also, additional $14.4 million for turnaround school support. So that's the support for our lowest performing schools that also is operated out of the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. And then another new initiative, $11 million for an early learning initiative. $950,000 was included for preschool regional training centers. So that's the work that those regional training centers do primarily for our students and funded for our students that have with IEPs. This extra money would help them support services they provide for general funded students. So, and then finally, $4.1 million to restore at least a little bit, just a little bit for KETS. You know, with virtual learning really exploding during the pandemic, our Office of Education and Technology is always advocating to make sure that we have appropriate hardware, software, and human support for the virtual learning component. And so this restores it back to the another $4.1 million for KETS restoration. It does not completely fund it to the request of our ABR. The link at the bottom of the page I have provided because if you look through House Bill 285, you're not going to see these dollar amounts articulated in a number or a language in House Bill 285. You'll need to go to this accompanying document, which is at this link, and you'll go into the 2022-24 executive budget recommendation, the operating budget, and you'll see the governor's intent in his recommendation of funding these types of initiatives. It's all included and wrapped up into the bigger appropriation, but you're not going to see it line for line. So I think that's a little bit hard for people when you hear the comments that it is included, but you go and look in the bill and you can't find the words. Sometimes in the governor's recommended budgets, you have to look to this additional budget document that is posted on the Office of the State Budget Director's page so that you can get the full picture. Next slide, please. Another key difference is language that is different in House Bill 1 and House Bill 285 regarding district staff salary compensation or compensation. House Bill 1, and I've put the exact quotation from the bill, encourages local districts to provide certified and classified staff a salary or compensation increase. House Bill 285 says it is a mandate and uses the word shall and says shall provide all certified and classified staff a salary or compensation increase of not less than 5%. And if you'll look back to that link that I provided on the earlier slide, you'll see in the governor's recommended and the accompanying budget language at that link, they have included a breakdown of the funds that they have included to help support that increase of 5%. So they actually break down how much is in there and break down that it also includes your general fund retirement contribution portion. So again, you're not going to see it in the bill itself. You'll see this language, but you won't see an amount in the budget bill. Next slide, please. Some similarities from both bills. An additional $5.4 million each year for vocational transportation, kind of paralleling that transportation increase that we talked about earlier. An additional $1.8 million in fiscal year 23 and $1.9 million in fiscal year 24 for our national board certified teachers. I did see one question in the chat. This is to fund national board certified teachers. Our state funding currently is at 63%, so we hope that this will get us to a full funding. It still does contain that language. If we have more national board certified teachers, then this will fulfill, then there is the opportunity to prorate that at the state level. 11.9 million each year, restoration of funding for professional development. That's another one of those things. You'll see it in House Bill 1. You'll actually see it in a line in House Bill 1. You'll see it in the accompanying budget document on the OSBD site for professional development that way. So you won't see a line item. You'll see it two different ways, but each House Bill 1 and 285 are indicating that it is there and funded. And then $8 million each year for the laybacks, adding centers to the allocation. Also, as I was reviewing my notes this morning, I wanted to also share AP and IB exams. It's not on your slide. Before we send the slide out, I'll add a little bullet so that you have this as well. AP and IB exams, $1 million in each fiscal year for free and reduced lunch students. I think that was similar to last time, but $2.6 million in each fiscal year for AP, first come, first serve. So a little bit more money there for AP exams. Next slide, please. School Facilities Construction Commission, just going to hit on this really quickly. Of course, this is not in the KDE appropriation, but we've gone back to additional offers of assistance of $100 million during the 22-24 fiscal biennium. That is in both bills. So good news that it's restored again up to that $100 million level. It kind of fallen down to, I think, $58 million previously. So it's good to see that number going back up. House Bill 1 contains some language about special offers of assistance to 14 specific construction projects in local school districts. So you might want to take a look there in House Bill 1 to see if, and this would be in the School Facilities Construction Commission section of the budget, to see if you are one of those local school districts that's listed. House Bill 285 appropriates $97.4 million to specific local school district projects. Again, this is through SFCC. This is sort of that continuation of some projects that went through a competitive process previously, and it looks like they're trying to fund from that scoring process a few more on the list. So again, you might want to go out there. If you were an applicant last year, you might want to go out and look at that list. And then an additional $75 million pool for grants, up to $10 million each for projects, and it has some clarifying language there. So SFCC, of course, is the best resource for you on SFCC funding and how that's going to work, but thought I would just kind of share that with you so you would have that high level information. Also, I'm not going to go into language for tornado relief. Of course, we have some of our districts more in Western Kentucky that have really been hit hard from tornado damage and the impact in December. The department continues to work with those districts on resolutions for the challenges they're having, both from operations and logistics and for funding. I'm not going to go into those particulars here. We do have a separate webcast that we do for the tornado district superintendents, and I'll be sharing with them. But there is some language in the budget bill, in the governor's recommended budget bill, House Bill 285, about a seek funding option for tornado impacted districts looking forward. So if you are a tornado impacted district, there is some language there, and we'll be sharing that information with your superintendents. I'm gonna stop.
Robin, Robin, you want to answer a couple of questions before we move on to Jesse?
Sure.
All righty. One of them is, where are these additional funds coming from? Are they ESSER ARP funds that the state has received that will end in 2 or 3 years, or are they revenues that are up in Kentucky this much?
That's a great question. So Kentucky actually, from an economic stability standpoint, has additional revenues. It's kind of a head scratcher, I know, but economically, the state has been doing pretty well. And I think this is where, because these are general fund dollars, so these are not ESSER fund dollars. These are not dollars that would go away. Now, of course, they're always subject to the next General Assembly session and what happens with continued funding. But for the upcoming biennium, these are general fund dollars the state is dedicating to public education.
Okay. Will ADA be held harmless, and what year are we using going forward?
So we didn't talk about ADA here, so let's talk about that just a little bit. As we roll forward, if you'll remember, we have one more year that we've allowed the freezing of our data. So in the upcoming school year, that funding has already been determined based upon your 1819 or 1920 ADA calculations. So it's our last year of COVID. Provided the General Assembly doesn't change anything, and of course they can always do that this session, but if not, then starting with the school year in the fall, we will go back to ADA and calculating our budgets, our dollars, the same way that we used to pre-COVID. So we have one more year of where funding is sort of frozen.
And seek, hold harmless?
Seek, hold harmless. What
I don't know. That was added to that same question. So is that one and the same?
It may be. It may be that that's what they're asking, that seek is held. As far as funding for the next school year, your funding is already held harmless, but we will start calculating, and you'll start collecting data next year like you always do.
Okay, here's one. I noticed the ZERS rate is actually declining from 21 to 22 with the underfunding of that pension system. Will the state be contributing more funding, or should we expect this rate to spike in future years as they are approved to increase the rate up to 12% over the prior year?
Yeah, so we were going to talk about retirement questions on this call. Both the governor and the House budget have indicated that, and this is just, I'm listening to what they're saying, just like you all are, but they both have indicated that they have fully funded both the pension systems, so KTRS and CERS. As far as can we expect this rate to spike in the future? I really can't answer that question. It's, there's no way to answer that right now.
Is KDE looking at options to address the shortfalls that districts with increasing enrollment are having and have been hit with?
Yeah, so this is how do we take districts down from holding them harmless for several years, and now if they go back into their normal calculations, they will have lost some enrollment. Of course, you're going to have more in both of these scenarios, more per pupil funding. So that's one way that the General Assembly and the governor's recommended budget helps with that. We have also been having conversations with the legislators about what that looks like. And there's also been conversations that are still ongoing about a possible movement to ADM. So all those things are still all being discussed at this time.
All right, that's all we have at the moment.
And I'm sorry, I'm looking at Kevin Ryan's question. He said with increasing enrollment.
Right.
So those are districts, that growth districts, and the General Assembly, of course, in the last budget bill did indicate that they are willing to consider growth amounts for our districts. And we have been in conversations with the General Assembly about that.
All right, that's the last one for now. We can come back, circle around later and see if we have any additional ones on the budget.
Yeah, if we can move on quickly, because I know we've got a lot more on the agenda, and I want to make sure that the other presenters have time to get through their materials. But I'll stay on the call.
All right, I think that's over to me then. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jessie Carlton. We're going to be talking about maintenance of equity and the ESSER data collection, and a little bit about the temporary remote instruction in Senate Bill 25 that just went through. So we'll try and get you out of here by 12. Let's go on to the next slide, Josh. I know everybody probably thought we were done with maintenance of equity. Everybody has certified for this year, but we're going to go over some things that they just announced for fiscal year 23. So as a quick reminder, remember, maintenance of equity, that is different from your maintenance of effort. What they're looking for is that state and local per pupil expenditures and sometimes state and local staffing. They're trying to see if those levels were equal or higher to the year before in both fiscal year of 22 and 23. Looks at those high poverty schools, and we have those on the website there if you'd like to see which schools are the high poverty schools in your district. Next slide, please, Josh. So recently, everything has been completed for fiscal year 22 by all districts in Kentucky. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody getting back to me. I know there was a little bit of back and forth with some districts trying to get that stable funding assurance in GMAP, but for all 170 counties or districts, excuse me, we have that done right now. So all districts either qualified under one of the 3 standard exceptions, or they signed the stable funding exception, or districts requested a special exception from the U.S. Department of Education. And so even though we may not have heard back officially from the U.S. Department of Education on that one, it's in their hands right now. So right about the time we got done with everything in Kentucky, they came out with some new guidance and new timelines. So they have actually pushed the official deadline out to March 31st, 2022 for all LEAs to report their exception or to report the data for fiscal year 22 to their states. So good news for us is we have already done that. We're ahead of the deadline on that one. There's the link right there to the district list of everyone's exceptions and what you contacted me or did through GMAP to say the exception you used for this year not to post the maintenance of equity data. So if you want to go out there and check that out, I think Steve will send this PowerPoint out after this. If you see anything, we can still update that. So if you say, oh, I was one of those districts with less than 1,000 students, I'd like to use that one instead or in addition to my stable funding assurance, just shoot me an email and we'll get that updated because we have some time. Next slide, please. Also in the new guidance that just came out, there was some good news. We were not sure, and we we didn't think that the stable funding exception would be available for fiscal year 23. They have now said that it is. So next year we will have all of the same exceptions. So we'll do the same thing again that we've done this year with the stable funding exception in GMAP. If you have one of the other standard exceptions, you can email straight to me. I would like to point out that as they're talking about this, the language around this exception this time, it seems to have been relaxed a little bit. It doesn't contemplate as strictly the school level expenditures. It's looking more broadly and talking about that districts can certify this exception, the stable funding exception, if there will be no reduction in state and local expenditures at the district level. Previously, they had talked about, no stable funding at the district level and that it wouldn't impact specific schools, those high poverty schools. They've taken even a step back this time to say, you know, we're looking at that district level. So it doesn't really contemplate looking down into that school level. So we're hopeful that as many, if not, you know, even a few more districts may be able to sign that stable funding for 23 and not do this reporting. Next slide. Okay, so this just shows what they updated. You know, they have two little check boxes here now that you could have, you know, signed off on the stable funding for both years. We have already done fiscal year 22. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it all again through GMAP for 23. The 23 exceptions must be posted by November of 2022. So we had originally thought that we would request this certification in GMAP again around August. It's one of the questions I wanted to ask finance officers today. Would July be a better time period? Trying to get a gauge of when you all think would be best. I know you all have so much to do, and especially right when the new fiscal year starts. Would July be a good time for this? Would you know, say no, August is good. Let's keep it in August. So if you have a preference on that, either way, shoot me an email or drop that in the chat and we'll see what we can do about that. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is just a review of all of those exceptions that will still be available next year. You know, that stable funding exception that has been expanded into 23, enrollment of less than 1,000 students, single school per district, and single school per grade span. And then, you know, we always have that option for the other exceptional circumstance that we can reach out to U.S. Department of Ed on. So I'm seeing lots of August in the chat, so I think we'll probably work to expand and maybe do this again in August after school's up and going. So thank you very much for that feedback. All right, next slide, Josh. Okay, we're going to transition real quickly from maintenance of equity reporting into ESSER integrated data collection. And this is the big one that we've been talking about, talking to superintendents about. We've known it's coming for a little while, and we have a little bit more information on it now. So next slide, Josh. Okay, so this report, it is a big data collection. It includes ESSER funds that were received under CARES, CRISA, and ARP. They had originally put this out to kind of give everybody a review period. They put out a form with lots of different data elements on it. Kentucky, along with a lot of other states, responded through the public comment time. And there are some things that have been adjusted, and I think they have been good adjustments that will hopefully help us. It's still a very large data collection, but we have got a little bit of relief. And the first relief we have received is that the reporting period has been moved back to May of 2022. So we're not going to be scrambling quite as much to get this all in here in the next little bit. Next slide. Okay, so these reporting periods, I like what they've done on the form. For those of you who have gone out and seen the form already, they have color coded a little bit for us because, you know, you're looking at those 3 separate funds. And so when it's laid out on the form for you to look at, everything is color coded. So you have your CARES funds in yellow, and they're a little bit different. Let's see, CRISA and ARP, they are both the first annual report, and they're for the fiscal year of 2021. But if you'll remember, we've actually, districts and state have actually done the first report for CARES. And I believe that was done back in February in GMAP. So it looked a lot different than this form and this data collection, but that one has already been done. So we're on to the second report for CARES and then the first annual report for the other 2. Next slide. Okay, so I know this is very, very small on a PowerPoint screen, but what I was trying to show here is that the public comment period also made Department of Ed make some changes to what was actually being requested. As you can see, what is on the right here is what was asked for previously in the form, and you can see it was very granular, lots of very specific subgroups. And what they have done now is they've transitioned to what is on the left, which are bigger, kind of more encompassing subgroups that hit, you know, personal services and salary and benefits and bigger chunks that hopefully aren't down quite as much in the weeds and will be able to pool. They've also tried to align these groups better to the NCES groupings. Now, if you still want to look and still want to see what was there previously on that right side, all of that data is in the appendix of the form that's posted on our site. Next slide. Okay, so here are these 4 big broad categories. We're addressing physical health and safety, meeting student needs. That did have the mental health in it previously. They've now broken that out. So mental health supports for students and staff, excuse me, are now out, and that operational continuity and other allowed uses. Next slide. So in all of these categories, all 4 of these categories, you have 2 personal service subgroups, one for salary and one for benefits. Previously, those salary and benefit costs were kind of scattered throughout all kinds of other smaller, more granular subgroups. So they've kind of like pulled them together now, hoping that will make this easier. It also has 2 broad categories for property and property services, when they had kind of been scattered throughout before. They had been talking about temporary classrooms and capacity of buildings and changes here, there, facilities. Now they've pulled those into hopefully broader groups that you can pull that data better. In the other allowed uses, they are in those standard broader categories, personal services, property, but that's where that appendix may come in handy, because the appendix still has everything that they wanted you to kind of group into that other uses category. It talks about, McKinney-Vento dollars and IDEA. So it may be good as you're working down through to kind of take a glance at that appendix, because any questions you have of, hey, I have an expense on this, where should it go? Which of these 4 categories would it go in? It may be laid out in that appendix. So next slide. Okay, so this form that I'm talking about, we have posted it on our website on the COVID resources for finance officers. It is a very long document. It starts out with the state, some state items that we will have to submit. We're going to get this into GMAP, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. So want to point out that this form is kind of for your informational purposes. Don't pull down this form and immediately start typing stuff in that you're going to, because we're not going to be able to take that form as submission. What we're going to have to do is put it in so that we can pull everybody's data together once it's put into our GMAP system. So I think it'll be a really good form to use to kind of help as a worksheet to work through this. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're talking about that submission of data to KDE. We're working on getting that entire form into GMAP so that you can enter that data in like you did previously for the first round of CARES. You'll notice as you go down through, when you hit the district section, there are 2 or 3 fields that are optional. So as you look down through that, we'd like to get some feedback from finance officers. Just because it's optional, we don't necessarily just want to opt out. We know everyone is busy, but we also want to accurately give a good representation of what's going on with these dollars. If this is something that you feel your district needs to submit to show fully how those dollars have been spent, send me an email and say, yeah, I think we need to have access to these optional fields, because what we want to encourage is we all districts to be consistent on this report. So if your neighboring district is putting it in and helps them make a better picture of what's going on, you may need to look at it in your district as well, because what we don't want is to miss some dollars or to miss some reporting that could help show how these dollars have been used. Once we've figured out exactly what's going into GMAP, I'll update that as well, so you have a 100% correct form that you can use as that worksheet. Next slide. Okay, so this is where we're also going to need some input from finance officers. We are looking for a realistic timeline for this submission. So, you may need to, if you haven't had time yet, go out and look at this form, because it is a very involved form. There's lots of expenditure data, but there's also a couple of sections that have some student group data of student counts. So that can be found either on your school report card, or it may even need to pull in your DPP to pull some reports from Infinite Campus or to pull some data off school report card. So this is due in May of 2022, and we're going to need time to get it into GMAP, and we're going to have to have some time at the end for KDE to compile all the districts together to put it in. So I'm thinking, I was originally thinking maybe March before school report card, when finance officers' other favorite times. But I think maybe a 4 to 6 week period that GMAP was open to do this. And we'd also like to know maybe any resources from KDE that you would need from us kind of to help along with this. And these all may be questions that you need to take a closer look at the form, kind of go over it, see what you have, see what kind of timeline, what's going on in your district, the other reports you have to do, see when it can fit in. And you're more than welcome to shoot me an email, weigh in on that before we kind of put some guardrails around the time for that submission. I don't think it's on here. Just remember my email address is actually jessica.carlton@education.ky.gov. So if you'll send those to me, we'll see if we can get a timeline for this laid out. Okay, next slide. Okay, I have about 4 minutes real quick to talk about temporary remote instruction. Let's go to the next slide, Josh. This is due to Senate Bill 25, which was actually signed by the governor, I believe last Friday. It had an emergency clause, and so it's now effective, and it's actually retroactive back to January 1st. And what this does is it extends the flexibility of schools to use those temporary remote learning days due to absences or staff shortages due to COVID. So the difference in the bill this time is previously TRI days were offered last semester, but they were at a district level. These are at a school level now. So each school can utilize up to 10 days of that temporary remote learning. So I know a lot of this has to do with things on the Infinite Campus side of the house, but wanted to give finance officer a heads up that this is going on, and that your schools may be using these temporary remote instruction days. It is important to note that if you are you can use these at multiple schools on the same day, but you cannot use a temporary remote instruction day for all schools in your district. If all schools in your district have moved to remote learning for a day, that needs to be a NTI day, non-traditional day. So you have 10 NTI days. If you've followed through with that process and applied for the NTI days, and now each school has 10 temporary remote instruction days. So if you are a smaller district and you are one school, one district, you can use a TRI day, even though, for the whole district, because your school is your district. So last slide, I think, is just a screenshot of how it's set up in campus and how this is coded. It's coded down to the student level, and this is how we'll look for it when we look to see how many days each school has used. We'll look in each school just to see if any student was marked with a TRI attendance code for that day, and that'll count as one for them. So I don't know if we have a question slide or if that's it, but I think that's all I have. Let me see if we have any questions here. When will this be added to GMAP? Let me see if we're still working to see how fast we can get these questions into GMAP. So hopefully I will have something out to finance officers here soon that says exactly when it can get into GMAP. I understand that the earlier it can open in GMAP, the better it is for finance officers. So you can work on it for over a longer span of time and work it in your other things.
Right.
Steve, do you want me to ask this question or last question, or do you want to take it? Or are we out of time?
Well, I'll ask Elisa actually,
Okay.
real quick. There was a Davis-Bacon, or not Elisa. This might be a Che question.
Yeah, I'm here.
yeah.
I'm reading it too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to flip on my video here. So
The guys did not want to be video, but I'm not sure about their PowerPoint on the Davis-Bacon.
I think we can get the PowerPoint, but I know this morning I saw an email between one of my staff and the Department of Labor. I think they were still working on getting some answers to the questions.
Okay.
Yes, he's actually, Mr. Jackson emailed us this morning. I thought it was this morning. It said he's still working on getting some answers He said he's apologizing for the time it's taken, but I'd say they're busy too. So Dina, if you will remind me or just shoot me an email here in a second, just say, hey, get that PowerPoint. I'll get that staff member to contact them and see if we can get a copy of it. And we'll put it out there on our webpage, and I'll send something out to everybody. And when we get the answers, we'll post that along with it too. But yeah, I wouldn't think it would take too long, probably not another week or so.
All right, and then just real quick on the attendance, the poll question, it worked for a short bit, but evidently it was a trial poll version, and so it cut us off at so many answers, and so well, I only got one out there. There were supposed to be 4, and so I'll have to work on that before the next webinar. So my apologies to everyone on that, and causing you to answer in the chat side. So I'll do a better job at heading that off next time around. But I think it worked. While it worked, I mean, I think it did its job. So anyway, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to having another one next month as well, with some additional things to bring for you as far as information on school finance. Y'all have a good day.